Hey folks, walk with me. Something that's occurred to me yesterday that I thought I would mention here. I was listening to a podcast a couple of weeks ago, I guess, and the podcast host said something like pretty, I think, normal and acceptable as it pertains to like social standards. And he said, he's talking about people, and he's like, some people are having mental health problems and some people are having addiction problems. And I blurted out loud, they're the same thing. And I wanted to sort of talk about that and kind of explain it a little bit. Now, I don't mean that every mental health issue brings with it an addiction issue. And I don't mean particularly that the addiction is the mental health issue. But to try to somehow like mangle away the concept of addiction from some sort of mental health challenge is misguided at best and probably pretty destructive in most situations. People get very sort of holier than thou when they can sort of pinpoint someone's addiction and kind of excoriate them for it. And I think we need to look at it tremendously differently. First of all, if somebody's having issues with addiction, and that can take a lot of different shapes, keep this in mind. Addiction can mean that you're using something, a substance or not a non-substance. I'll talk about that a little bit. But you're using something to sort of suppress uncomfortable situations, uncomfortable feelings. You have uncomfortable situations because you have some sense of feeling around that is causing the discomfort, right? Like no particular situation in and of itself is particularly discomforting, not talking about like physical discomfort, but sort of mental, emotional discomfort. But for your, whatever you're bringing with you that informs that discomfort. And so you have obvious things, even sort of like social drinking, I think can sort of slip into this realm of addiction. We know the obvious ones, right? We have the opioid crisis, we have alcoholism, we have people who use and abuse and, overly self-medicate in many, many different ways. And those ones seem obvious. But I think there is sort of quite a spectrum where it's not just sort of if you're, by the clinical definition, an alcoholic, right? I think that there's a lot of, like I said, something like social drinking or recreational drug use, that they'll say. Something that's not considered to be, quote unquote, a problem because it's not particularly interfering with other parts of their life, seemingly, right? Or maybe just not yet. And so I think that as it pertains to sort of like the mental health, the mental emotional state that is being addressed by whatever the addiction is or whatever the use is, I think there can be a wide range there. And it's not just the clinical, we need to put you in rehab sort of use case. Now, substances are obvious, right? Self-harm things are obvious. But what about the things that society will sort of reward people for, right? Being addicted to your work, right? A workaholic. Being addicted to the gym, right? Being addicted to your diet and your fitness and just having that sort of rule your life and using that as its own form of substance in order to suppress or in your mind kind of overcome, right, to quiet whatever the thing is that's telling you you need to go do that to the extreme. But these things, like the workaholism, the overly diet and exercise folks, they're often sort of pedestalized, right? They're not excoriated for their addiction. They have what people would call a healthy addiction. Maybe that's becoming questionable on the workaholic side of things, but in any case, hopefully you get my point, that there are things that fall into this same category, that those people are doing the same thing. They've just found a bit of a cheat code, that they're doing something that no one or very few people are going to really point out to them and say, like, you're damaging yourself, like something else is going on here. And what's the real question? The real question, maybe I buried the lead here in this video a lot, I think I might have, but the real question here isn't why do you drink so much? The question isn't why is it impossible for you to go to a family function without having an edible or overeating, right? Or whatever it is. The question is, in all of these cases, including the case where somebody is so sort of fixated and addicted to their diet and exercise, the question is, why all the pain? The pain is what is informing maybe even it's not even a decision to partake in whatever the addictive behavior is, or the addictive behavior seems sort of like a misnomer in the way that I'm talking about it. It includes that, but I'm thinking anything that sort of redirects, right? It's like a redirective behavior. You don't want to deal with the pain, whatever that pain is. And so you redirect your mental capacity, right? Your cognition, and you redirect your feelings, you redirect your somatic response, your body response. You redirect those things through something that we would, like I said, standardly call addiction, or something that we standardly may not call addiction, like an overfixation on health food, and being really restrictive and militant about it, if you will. But the question needs to be here, why all the pain? And if you have somebody who you need to kind of address this with, I'm just telling you, it's probably not going to go well. It may not go well anyway, but I think you really are going to have an uphill battle, maybe an impossible battle. If your standpoint is, I need you to stop X, sort of that typical intervention method, and I think you're going to get a lot further and get to something a lot more true and meaningful if you go with why all the pain. And the thing is, it's not going to elicit that immediate response that the I need you to stop doing X is going to elicit, right? Whether that's a good response or a bad, whether it's confrontational or if it's agreeable or whatever. I think people just want an immediate kind of response. And the problem that most people are going to have with going the direction of why all the pain is it's not going to be that quick answer. It's going to be something that will probably take some time to either figure out for the person, or if they know it, know a piece of it, know all of it, it may take them quite some time to be able to come to terms with it themselves, and then another chunk of time to be able to want to share it, to come back to the person who's posing the question and be like, here's the deal. But I would just say the other thing to keep in mind, and this is maybe from sort of an empathetic perspective, the person who's going through those things or is struggling with those things, they don't want to be either. They may not admit that, They may not be willing to part with whatever that thing is because it's what's allowing them to, at least in their mind, feel like they're keeping their head above water, right? It probably doesn't seem like that to you, but to them, there's an element of that. And so, I would say just keep that in mind, that when all is said and done, if you embark down this path and if they're willing to go with you into these waters, it'll become apparent to them sooner than later that they don't want to have to be relying on this thing either. So it's not, I feel like the cop-out of addiction is just that, like, oh, it's this thing that does certain things to your brain and then you can't stop. And I understand there's an element of that. But the question is, why do you need that type of intrusion into your cognition or into your feeling set? Why do you need that redirection that we talked about before? That's the question. That's because there is the pain. What's the pain? All right, folks, a little soapboxy today. Speaking of holier than thou, hopefully it didn't come across that way. But I feel like this in and of itself is an epidemic, that we have this idea of, like, some people are suffering from mental health and some people are addicted, and we gotta stop divorcing these things. We've got to ask real questions, and it's a longer, slower, harder path to walk down, but it's a more real and fundamentally true and long-lasting one. So that's why I bring it up. So for the single digits of people who watch this, maybe you can help go change the world with this idea. But in any case, if you walked with me, we got in a solid 12 minutes. If you didn't, I still appreciate you watching this far, and as always, I will see you in the next video.